anchoring, with the two Pissarro family members with their backs or sides turned roughly towards us with their rich drapery left and right. We have this solid vertical composition with this pair of columns, the one to the right rising right out of that Pissarro family member, coming right through the Virgin and Child to dominate the right-hand part of the painting. Those columns, while they're both vertical, are one larger, one narrower, one coming out towards us, one pushing away from us, one scintillating with light and just a little bit of shadow across it, the other completely submerged in shadows. More importantly, the center of the composition is really a dramatic diagonal, a heroic diagonal, in which we find St. Peter in the middle of the stairs, in the middle of the composition, intermediating between the Pissarro family member to the lower left and the Virgin and Child to the upper right, just as we find a kind of symmetria of figures and what they stand for, with St. Francis to the right, just above the Pissarro grouping there, and a Turk whom we can recognize by his headgear, and a flag that represents the conflict and the contact between Venice and the Turks, balancing the agglomeration of figures that include St. Francis on the right. It is at one and the same time a serious and yet a light-hearted kind of presentation. Look again at the lower right-hand part of the composition. One of the kids in the Pissarro family has been distracted by your and my entering onto the scene and turns quickly to look at us, while everyone else is otherwise focused on this reverent moment. None of them can see what you and I can see, because the roofing has been blown away. All we see is sky, but in the sky there are clouds. All they see are the clouds. We see above the clouds this series of little putti carrying the instruments of martyrdom that foretell what will happen to the infant currently seated on his mother's lap when present becomes future, when future becomes present. So space is transformed into depths and into exciting foreground and background dialogues, and time is of course transcended when past and present and future all interweave. Now this work was painted in 1526, as I said. That's a year before Charles I of Spain, who is at the same time Charles V, the Habsburg Emperor, a year before he sacked Rome in his war with Francis I of France. It's just a few years after Luther was excommunicated by the Pope. It is, in other words, right at the center of the beginning crisis known as the Reformation, a crisis that would separate Western Christendom into the Catholic South and the Protestant North, into Catholic Italy, Spain, and France, and Protestant Germany. Germany carries us over the Alps, and that, of course, is where we must go next, to see where, during the same period of pushing into and arriving through the High Renaissance in Italy, south and north, what is happening north of the Alps in the worlds of Germany and the Netherlands. That's where we go next. When we look north of the Alps, as we arrive toward the end of the 15th and the beginning of the 16th century, the time period that we have referred to as High Renaissance in Italy, south of the Alps, when we arrive to Germany and France and the Netherlands in between, we find ourselves at that